Arvo Pärt is an Estonian contemporary classical composer. His compositions are dated from the earliest I could see was 1959, and he seems to be still going, though he's had a few big gaps in his composition output over the years. In some of the early years, he got into trouble with the Soviet authorities. Some of that was because he was using styles that were not sanctioned or allowed by the authorities. There was also an issue that he was considered to be suspect because he had religious elements to some of his music. He invented a compositional technique he called tintinnable, which is from the Latin word for bell, which is about having two voices, one using notes from a chord and one using notes from a scale going on at the same time. Hi, my name's Dan. So this is my first encounter with this album, and I think my first encounter with Arvo Pärt in any shape or form. The instant thing that happens when we step into the classical world in these albums, or sometimes happens, is that the classical world works differently to the popular music world, in that the basic unit of classical music is the composed work. So most albums are effectively compilations. Now, sometimes they're compilations of several pieces by the same composers. They're not necessarily. There might be different composers on the album. They tend to focus when they're listing the name of the album, etc. Often focus on one particular work and use the name of that, and they tend to use the name of the composer rather than the performers. Although they do get billing, and recognition, which is completely different to the rock world, where if somebody did a version of somebody else's song, it was their name, the band who've done it, who got their name up front. So sometimes this means in the classical world that you get several albums named after one piece or from one person, sometimes you get obviously different recordings of the same piece. You get different accompanying pieces, and it just sometimes makes it a little bit harder to find which particular album was the one that Acclaimed Music are listing in their list. I'm pretty sure I've identified this one. It's a 1984 album, which is called Tabula Rasa and has several works by Arvo Pärt on it. So let's do some... before I even describe the music, I'm going to kind of talk about what the different tracks are on here. So there's two versions of a composition called Fratares, with different instrumentation. Now, apparently this was a composition which didn't define what the instrumentation was, so there are many different interpretations of it. When I was listening to the album, I didn't realise that these were the same piece, so that tells you something about how diverse the different interpretations of this piece can be. So the first one is track 1, which is for solo violin and piano. Okay, and then the other version is track 3, which is for 12 cellos, which is an interesting instrumentation. Track 2 is a composition called Cantus in Memory of Benjamin Britten, and that's performed by bell and string orchestra. And the bell's very obvious. It starts off the track. And tracks 4 and 5 are the piece Tabula Rasa, which is a 2-movement composition, and is described as being a double concerto for 2 solo violins, prepared piano, and chamber orchestra. And so the last little piece of information to throw in is that a prepared piano is where somebody takes a piano and the sounds that are made by the piano are altered, usually by inserting objects that interfere with the vibrations of the strings, like screws screwed between the strings, or rubbers to dampen the sound of the strings, or forks, or anything that you happen to fancy and like the sound of. So, finally, let's get around to describe what the music sounds like. So there's a heavy emphasis on strings here. There's a lot of flowing feeling to the music. It's kind of goes up and down in intensity. So you get high, intense sections, you get calm sections, you get loud, you get quiet. Obviously, you get musically high and low, but within that, it feels like a kind of continuum of music, and that's achieved through this method of composition of his called after the Latin for bell, which I've instantly forgotten, where he kind of puts these things against each other. It's in terms of contemporary classical music, I've listened to a reasonable amount of things by other people, and I would say that this is definitely on the musical end of the spectrum of contemporary classical, and it's got quite an open sound because of the way that it's done, but it definitely feels like it's got harmony and harmonic structure. And generally, I found it to be quite beautiful, and I was quite taken with it. The first, going to pick out a few things. The first version of Frattares, so that's the first track on the album, has some what sound to me impossibly high notes on the violin, and they're beautifully played. They're just so exquisite. That's my favourite track because of those high notes that just, they're lovely. The second version of Frattares has got a continuous note underneath, so it's got a low note that plays through the whole track. Now, I don't play the cello, but I'm reasonably aware of how a cello is played with a bow. And if that's been done by one of the 12 cellos, then it's incredibly skilled to be able to play that without any variation in volume. Particularly difficult when you're bowing. When you stop bowing forwards and start bowing backwards, that usually gives you at least a glitch, if not a stop in the note. So there's some really good playing going on to do that. The second movement of Tabula Rasa has an interesting figure in it that happens over and over again, which is a kind of rising and then a bong sound. And I think that's the prepared piano that's in here. I initially, when I heard it, before I did some reading, thought that must be some kind of synthesizer, because it's quite an interesting and strange sound. So maybe that was I presume it was the piano. I liked all of it. It's a nice album. It feels like a warm blanket. It's got beauty to it. It's got intensity and emotion to it. It's not just a clinical idea. So, yeah, it went down well with me. As always, at this point, I'd like to invite you to tell me what you think about this album. So please do talk to me through the comments box. I read all comments, and I'm interested to hear what people say. That's it from me for now.